Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just absolute precision. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Like it's a math equation.
Right. Like you break your arm, you go to the hospital, they take the x-ray, and the doctor just points at that jagged white line and says, there it is.
It's totally binary. The bone is broken or it's not. The problem is visible, it's isolated, and the solution is entirely mechanical. You put a cast on it.
Exactly. But then, and this is really the setup for our deep dive today,
Yeah.
you step into the world of sociology.
Oh, and the X-ray machine is completely useless.
Completely useless. You look at the mechanics of how human societies actually function, how they rise, how they decay, and suddenly that diagnostic landscape is incredibly murky.
Right.
Because when a society becomes fundamentally corrupt, you can't just point to a single broken bone. The sickness is systemic. It's in the nervous system.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters, primarily because, in a deeply corrupt society, the sickness usually disguises itself as the cure.
Yeah, that is the terrifying part.
Right. The institutions that are actually causing the decay are the very ones demanding your reverence for holding society together.
And that paradox, that exact contradiction, is what we are unpacking today. We are exploring a truly fascinating historical and sociological analysis. It's drawn from a classic commentary on ancient texts, specifically Surah 10 of the Quran.
Which is such a rich text to pull from for this.
It really is. And I want to be clear right up front for you listening. Whether you come to this text from a place of deep faith or you view it purely as ancient literature, what we are about to explore is going to fundamentally reframe how you look at power.
Definitely. We are analyzing this material as an intricate, ancient blueprint of human sociology.
Yeah, we're going to examine two massive concepts today, the protocol and the systemic reset. Like what actually happens to the architecture of a society when its network of power becomes irreparably corrupt?
And how do these ancient narratives describe the inevitable flood that eventually washes those systems away?
It's such a vital framework.
Yeah.
Because the source material we're examining treats these ancient narratives not just as, historical events.
No, it treats them as universal laws of human behavior. It details the precise mechanics of institutional exploitation.
Right.
And it breaks down the deeply ingrained psychological barriers that keep that exploitation functioning year after year, generation after generation.
And most importantly, I think, it lays out the protocol.
Yes, the protocol.
Which is this highly specific set of conditions required to trigger a systemic reset. Our aim today is to look at the underlying logic of these ancient blueprints and apply them to the structures of power you and I interact with every single day.
So where do we start? The disease itself?
Yeah, let's start with the anatomy of the disease. The source text spends a lot of time detailing the architecture of a corrupt network. And it uses a very specific metaphor, which is the priesthood.
Right.
But reading through your notes on the commentary, my first thought was, wait, is this just a critique of ancient religious orders? Because it seems so much broader than that.
Oh, it is much, much broader. The text uses the concept of the religious priesthood as the ultimate archetype, but it's really a metaphor for any institutionalized system of exploitation.
Any system that relies on untouchable authority.
Exactly. According to the text, these power structures do something incredibly insidious. They take an ideology that should inherently act as a guiding light, a moral compass for humanity, and they convert it into a highly profitable, exclusive profession.
They completely monopolize it.
They don't just monopolize it, they weaponize it. They weaponize it for extraction.
Wow.
The source argues that these exploitative classes invent false doctrines. They attribute those doctrines to a higher authority, often the divine or God, or sometimes just an unquestionable patriotic or ancestral tradition.
Like the founding fathers wanted it this way or something.
And then they use that manufactured authority to consume the wealth of the masses. And the crucial element here, the thing you have to understand, is that they do all of this without performing any constructive work themselves.
They produce nothing.
Nothing. The text explicitly points out that they eat the wealth of the people falsely. The entire premise of their income, their status, and their leverage is based on a carefully constructed illusion.
The source brings up an analogy here that completely stopped me in my tracks. I really wanted to spend some time on it because it changes how you view just everyday economic exchanges. It's the cobbler analogy.
Oh, I love the cobbler analogy. It's a brilliant comparative tool.
Right. So think about a humble cobbler in a village. You go to them with a broken shoe. Let's actually look at the mechanics of that exchange.
Okay.
The cobbler has spent years acquiring a tangible skill. They invest their physical time, the wear and tear on their own hands, and their material resources to fix your shoe. You pay them for that labor.
It is a system of mutual cooperation.
Exactly. Value is exchanged for tangible value. Both parties walk away from that transaction with something real.
The cobbler's survival is tethered to their actual utility to the community.
But then you look at this corrupt network, this institutionalized priesthood that the text describes. They operate on an entirely different plane.
A completely different reality.
They take the absolute largest slice of the societal pie, but they produce nothing tangible. They don't fix shoes, they don't harvest crops, they don't build infrastructure.
No.
They thrive entirely on public reverence and emotional manipulation, demanding a cut of everyone else's hard work. If we look at this biologically, it's not a symbiotic relationship like the cobbler.
It's parasitic.
It's completely parasitic. It's like a strangler fig wrapping around a healthy tree, sapping its nutrients while providing absolutely zero photosynthesis of its own.
And if we dig into the psychology of why this parasite survives, the text notes this profound, almost tragic irony.
What's that?
Well, these exploiters actually live in a state of constant begging.
Wait, begging.
Think about it. They rely entirely on donations, offerings, tithes, public subsidies. They do not possess the skills to earn a living through physical labor or tangible production.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah. They are completely dependent on the working class. Yet, through this massive manipulation of ideology, they flip reality upside down.
So even though they're dependents,
Despite being dependents, they are treated as the most respected, untouchable members of society. They demand titles, they expect the best seats in any assembly, and they demand your money, all while convincing you that they are performing a profound service by allowing you to give it to them.
they've convinced the tree that it needs the strangler fig to stand upright.
That is the illusion, exactly. And the source doesn't just treat this as a theoretical concept either. It maps this dynamic onto real documented history to show the devastating long-term effects.
Right.
The author notes that historically, when this specific type of parasitic extraction reaches a breaking point, when the economic burden becomes just too heavy for the masses to bear, there is inevitably a violent societal reaction.
The text explicitly points to the Reformation in Europe as a prime example of this, right?
Yes.
Martin Luther, 1517, nailing the 95 Theses to the door. But let's actually look at the mechanics of what Luther was fighting, because it perfectly illustrates the text's point. The Catholic Church at that time had turned the ideology of salvation into an extraction machine.
Through the sale of indulgences.
Right. You had men like Johann Tetzel going from town to town, essentially selling get-out-of-purgatory-free cards.
Yeah.
As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs.
It was a literal monetization of the divine.
It was the priesthood model operating at peak efficiency.
They had taken the most profound human fear, which is the fear of eternal suffering, and turned it into a revenue stream to fund the construction of St. Peter's Basilica.
It's wild.
And Luther's movement was an inevitable structural pushback against this authority. The church was holding not just peasants, but entire monarchs in economic and spiritual debt.
But the text makes a really interesting observation about the aftermath of the Reformation. Luther succeeds in fracturing that power structure, sure, but what happens next?
Well, the reaction was so severe, the public trust had been so deeply betrayed, that it eventually birthed pure secularism and materialism in Europe.
Because the ideology itself was tainted.
Precisely. Because the concept of the divine had been so thoroughly corrupted and weaponized by the exploiters, subsequent generations didn't just reject the corrupt institutions, they rejected the underlying ideology entirely.
They associated the concept of faith or spirituality strictly with exploitation, so they basically clear-cut the entire forest to get rid of the strangler figs.
That's a great way to put it. They threw out the spiritual baby with the exploitative bathwater. And the text argues that this leads to a purely materialistic worldview, which leaves society unbalanced in a completely new way.
How so?
Well, you remove the parasite, but you also remove the moral and ethical framework that was supposed to bind the society together in the first place, leaving behind a hyper-individualistic, material-driven culture that eventually breeds its own forms of exploitation.
Which forces a massive question. If this exploitative network inevitably corrupts the ideology it claims to protect, and violently tearing down the institution often destroys the society's moral foundation, how does genuine reform actually happen?
It's the ultimate puzzle.
Right. If you want to challenge the strangler fig without burning down the tree, what are the mechanics of a legitimate challenge? How do you spot a true reformer versus just another opportunist trying to take over the collection plate?
And that dilemma leads us directly to the second major theme from the source material, the protocol of truth.
The protocol.
Yes, the text zeroes in on one specific, uncompromising phrase that acts as the ultimate litmus test for any genuine reform movement.
Okay.
According to the text, whenever a true reformer or a messenger arrives to challenge these deeply entrenched corrupt networks, their very first declaration is always identical.
What is it?
They stand before the public, they stand before the power structure, and they declare, I ask you for no reward.
I ask you for no reward.
Right.
Okay. On the surface, that sounds noble, but maybe a little naive.
It does sound a bit idealistic at first.
Right. But as I read through the sociological analysis here, I realized this isn't just a polite opening statement. It is a devastating structural mechanism.
Devastating.
Let's walk through why this is the ultimate weapon against corruption. The corrupt network we've been describing operates entirely on profit, leverage, and vested interests.
Yes.
Their entire language, their entire defensive architecture is built around extracting wealth and consolidating power.
They understand human motivation purely in terms of transaction. That's all they know.
Right. So if a threat emerges, their defense mechanisms are calibrated to handle threats within that same economic language. If a charismatic leader rises up and starts pointing out the corruption, the elite know exactly how to handle it.
They know how to bribe them.
Exactly. They know how to negotiate a peace treaty where they carve up the territory and split the profits.
Yeah.
Or, if the challenger is particularly effective, they know how to assimilate them into the ruling class. Here's a seat on the board of directors. Here's a title. Now, calm down.
It's the classic co-optation of a rebellion. We see it all the time.
But the moment a reformer steps into the arena and establishes the protocol, I ask you for no reward, it completely short-circuits the network's ability to respond.
Totally.
Because you cannot bribe someone who does not value your currency. You cannot offer a corner office to someone who is actively trying to condemn the building.
Right. By completely removing the financial motive from their movement, the reformer renders the elite's primary weapons completely useless. They become immune to the economy of the corrupt system. It creates an existential crisis for the exploiter. The priesthood model turns ideology into a profession. The protocol of the messenger actively, publicly refuses to monetize the ideology.
It's a direct threat to their business model.
Exactly. The source states very clearly if you want to know if someone is bringing truth or if they are just trying to set up a new competing exploitation model, look at their material gain.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. Are they making a living off of this message? Are they elevating their social status? If they are extracting a reward from the people they claim to be saving, the text suggests they are fundamentally compromised.
I understand the structural brilliance of that. I really do. But I have to admit, I struggle with the practical reality of it.
How so?
Well, I want to look at human psychology for a second. If it's not money, if it's not social status, if it's not political power, what actually motivates this protocol?
That's the big question.
Right. A human being cannot operate in a total vacuum of desire.
Yeah.
People don't just wake up and decide to take on a massive, hostile, entrenched empire just for the intellectual exercise.
No, of course not.
To sustain a dangerous movement against powerful people requires an immense amount of energy. How do you generate that energy with zero ROI? Zero return on investment.
It's a very valid challenge, and it's the exact psychological hurdle the source addresses next. The text acknowledges that doing something without any inner motive is a psychological impossibility. A human being needs a catalyst to move, a desire to fulfill. You cannot have sustained action without a motive.
So what's the motive?
So if the motive isn't material wealth or social dominance, what is it? The text provides a profound answer. The reward for the reformer comes entirely from the divine.
Okay, but let's translate that. For you listening right now, trying to apply this to the real world, stripping away the mystical or theological connotations for a moment, what does reward from the divine actually mean in sociological terms?
In the context of this sociological analysis, the reward from the divine is the successful manifestation of the righteous system itself.
Okay.
The reformer's internal desire is perfectly aligned with the universal laws of justice and equilibrium. They aren't looking for a paycheck. Their reward is the realization of a functioning, equitable society.
Their ROI is seeing humanity freed from the parasite.
Exactly. The source explains that the reformer is commanded to be part of the community they are building. The text uses the term Muslim here, and it's really vital we understand how the source defines this word sociologically, not just as a religious demographic.
Right. How is it defined here?
In this context, it means one who submits to the divine laws of peace and justice. It is not an individualistic pursuit of spiritual enlightenment in a cave.
It's not passive.
No, it is the active, collective creation of a tangible, just society where exploitation is eradicated. That physical, societal reality is the reward.
And because that reward is generated by adherence to universal principles, it cannot be granted by the corrupt elite.
And more importantly, it cannot be revoked by them either.
So, to use an analogy, if the corrupt system is a massive polluting factory that monopolizes the town's water supply, the elite understand anyone who comes to them demanding a share of the factory's profits.
They can pay that person off.
Right. But the reformer with the protocol doesn't want to share the profits. They don't even want to own the factory. Their only motive, their reward, is seeing the river run clean again so the town can drink.
Wow, yeah.
And because the elite don't own the river itself, they have absolutely nothing to offer the reformer.
That's a really powerful way to visualize it. The protocol of zero vested interest makes the reformer a terrifying anomaly to the system. It exposes the artificial nature of the elite's power.
And the text uses this exact framework to set the stage for one of its most critical historical examples. It moves from theory to practice.
Right.
To see what actually happens when this selfless, unbribable protocol clashes directly with a deeply entrenched, highly profitable, corrupt network, we have to examine the ultimate case study provided in the source, the logic behind the story of Noah.
It's important we approach this carefully because the story of Noah, or Nuh, as the text refers to him, it carries so much cultural baggage.
So much baggage. When most of us hear Noah, we immediately picture a children's nursery rhyme. We think of a big wooden boat, 2 of every animal marching up a ramp, 40 days of rain.
Not Sunday school lesson.
Exactly. We view it as a fable about weather and divine anger. But the source material strips all of those superficial elements away and focuses entirely on the underlying structural logic of the event.
Yes.
It presents the interaction between Noah and his society as the ultimate archetypal case study in how a systemic reset is triggered.
The text focuses intensely on the specific dialogue and the power dynamics between Noah and his people before the flood. And it highlights an incredibly specific, audacious challenge that Noah issues to the corrupt network of his time.
Tell me about this challenge.
According to the source, Noah stands before the massive power structures of his society, the very people who profit from the exploitation, and he issues an absolute, unapologetic ultimatum. He essentially says, if my presence here and the message of uncompromised truth I am bringing offends you, if it threatens your entire architecture of exploitation, then do not hold back.
Don't hold back.
Gather all your partners, pool all your resources, your wealth, your influence, finalize your absolute best schemes, and execute them against me without giving me a single moment of respite.
Think about the staggering confidence of that statement for a second.
It's massive.
Noah is a man operating with zero institutional backing. He is standing in front of an empire that has every material advantage, and he isn't asking for a compromise. He's not trying to negotiate a treaty or find middle ground.
No.
He is looking at the architects of the corrupt system and saying, hit me with everything you have.
He is inviting their full, unmitigated wrath.
Why? How can someone do that? I mean, if you're standing in front of a rotting, corrupt dam that's holding back a reservoir of toxic water, and you know the dam is failing, you don't stand at the base of it and yell, break!
Right.
Unless you know something about the structural integrity of the canyon that the builders don't.
Exactly. And he can issue that challenge because, as the text explains, his reliance is entirely on the divine laws.
Which, again, sociologically means what?
In this framework, divine laws aren't just arbitrary rules written in the sky. They are the fundamental, universal laws of cause and effect, of truth and falsehood, of structural stability and decay. Noah knows the underlying physics of reality.
He knows how the system works.
He knows that a system built entirely on false exploitation, on consuming wealth without producing value, cannot sustain itself when brought into direct conflict with a protocol built on absolute truth and zero vested interest.
He knows the strangler fig cannot survive if the tree finally decides to stop providing sap.
Yes. And the source uses this interaction to explain the deep underlying logic of the flood.
This is key.
In this analytical framework, the flood isn't just a random punitive weather event. It is the logical, inevitable consequence of a corrupt network that refuses to adapt to reality. It is the ultimate systemic reset.
A systemic reset. Let's really dig into that phrase. The societal system had become so clogged with corruption, so entrenched in its exploitative models, that it could no longer function according to the laws of reality.
It was a structural failure waiting to happen.
Right. Noah arrives, establishes the protocol, I ask you for no reward, and presents them with the truth. He offers them a way to dismantle the corrupt structure safely, but they reject it.
Over and over again.
So reality itself steps in and crushes the structure.
Precisely. The text points out that Noah removes all financial motive. He makes it completely clear he isn't trying to replace their exploiters with himself. He is offering a genuine structural escape from the cycle of corruption.
Yeah.
And when they still refuse, when they choose to pool their massive resources to destroy the truth teller instead of fixing their own broken foundation, the reset is triggered. The tension breaks.
And the text highlights the specific aftermath, right? The goal isn't just destruction for the sake of destruction.
Exactly. The source explicitly mentions that Noah and his followers are saved and made successors or inheritors of the earth. The systemic reset of the flood doesn't just wipe out the old. It specifically clears the board so that a new, uncorrupted, selfless network can be established.
Like a forest fire.
Exactly. Think of an ecosystem that has become completely overrun by an invasive species that chokes out all other life. Sometimes, a massive forest fire is the only mechanism that can clear the deadwood and allow the dormant seeds of native plants to finally grow.
Right.
The text argues that this is a universal sociological law. Any society built purely on exploitation and falsehood, when confronted with undeniable truth and refusing to change, will eventually face its own flood, its own catastrophic systemic collapse.
Which brings up a massive, frustrating question for me.
What's that?
If someone shows up with undeniable logic, clear evidence of structural failure, and zero ulterior motives, I mean, they aren't asking for your money, they aren't running for office, they just want to fix the failing dam before it kills everyone, why doesn't the network just listen?
It's baffling.
Right. Why would a society, why would rational human beings choose the path of absolute destruction, choose the flood, instead of just adapting to the truth? Why is human resistance to truth so violently stubborn?
That is perhaps the most pivotal question in sociology, and the source material dedicates a significant amount of text to answering it.
Okay.
It transitions here from structural sociology into deep, almost clinical psychological analysis. The author examines the psychology of denial, focusing on what the text calls the sealed mind.
The sealed mind.
The author explains that the corrupt network doesn't reject the truth because there is a lack of evidence, or because Noah's arguments lacked logical rigor. They reject it because of three profound, deeply embedded psychological barriers.
What are they?
Istakbar, which translates roughly to deep-seated arrogance or an inflated ego, vested financial interests, and a blind, unthinking adherence to ancestral traditions.
Let's break those down one by one, because when you read this ancient text, it sounds like it was written yesterday by a cognitive psychologist studying political polarization.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's start with Istakbar, this inflated ego. How does that act as a barrier to truth?
Well, Istakbar isn't just being boastful. In this context, it refers to a psychological state where a person's entire identity and self-worth are intrinsically tied to their superior position within the corrupt hierarchy.
Yeah.
If they admit that the reformer is right, they aren't just losing an argument, they're losing their ontological status. They have to admit that they are not superior, that they are not gods on earth, but merely humans who have been committing a grave injustice.
That's a huge psychological blow.
Right. The ego views the truth as a lethal threat to its existence, so it violently rejects it just to survive.
And then you add the second barrier, vested financial interests. That's the Upton Sinclair quote, right? It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it.
Exactly. The cognitive dissonance is powered by economics. If accepting the truth means bankrupting the institution you rely on, your brain will find a way to rationalize rejecting the truth.
And the third barrier,
Right.
blind adherence to ancestral tradition. Like, we've always done it this way, our fathers did it this way. Are you saying our fathers were fools?
Yes. It weaponizes nostalgia and tribal loyalty against logic.
And here is where the text makes a crucial observation about how these barriers operate in real time. The source explicitly draws parallels to psychoanalysis.
It does. It argues that when a disruptive new truth is presented, people often make an immediate, emotionally driven decision to reject it. They don't actually process the data.
They just react.
Right. They feel a threat to their ego, their Istakbar, or a threat to their income stream, or a threat to their tribal identity, and they instantly throw up a defensive wall. And the text says that once that immediate ego-driven emotional rejection happens, their minds become sealed.
The terminology there is striking. Sealed minds, stamped hearts.
In modern psychological terms, we would describe this as severe confirmation bias calcifying into permanent cognitive dissonance. The text explains that this emotional rejection forces the false beliefs deep into the unconscious mind. The individuals aren't just holding a different opinion anymore, their very identity becomes fused with the false system.
It's like pouring concrete over a fragile foundation. Once it sets, you can't just unpour it.
Exactly. The author notes that these psychological idols of false belief become so deeply embedded that they have to be actively dug out and dismantled, much like a psychoanalyst has to slowly bring repressed trauma to the surface before the truth can even be logically processed.
I want to make this very practical for you listening right now, because we've all experienced this. Think about a recent argument you had, maybe about politics or society, or even something in your workplace. Have you ever presented someone with a completely irrefutable piece of evidence? A clear chart, a documented fact, and watched them just blink, ignore it, and double down on a conspiracy theory?
We see it constantly, every day.
Based on this text, what it's saying is that once that mental firewall drops, once someone rejects an idea because their ego or identity is tied to it bringing more data or better charts or more articulate arguments, is completely useless, isn't it?
That is exactly what the text is arguing, and it serves as a stark warning. The source warns very strongly against making immediate emotional reactions to new information.
Yeah.
It suggests that if you reject a truth based on ego or vested interest, you literally lose the mental capacity to perceive it later. The text points to ancient verses saying that once the mind is sealed, you can warn them or not warn them. It makes absolutely no difference.
They're blind to it.
They have lost the ability to perceive reality outside their constructed illusion.
You can't out-argue a sealed mind with logic, because the barrier isn't logical. It's emotional and structural.
Precisely. You are trying to use a map to show someone the way out of a maze, but they are convinced they are already standing in a wide-open field. The map is useless to them.
That is terrifying, honestly. It explains so much about public discourse today. Two people can look at the exact same set of undeniable facts. One person sees reality, and the other person sees a malicious conspiracy against their identity.
Yes.
The text is saying that the second person's mind is sealed by their prior emotional commitment to the exploitative system. They literally cannot process the data.
And the text doesn't just leave this as an abstract psychological concept either. It moves forward to demonstrate how this psychological blindness plays out on the grandest political stage imaginable.
Which brings us to the ultimate case study of politics, power, and illusion. Moses taking on Pharaoh.
This is such a brilliant shift in the narrative. We move from the pure structural logic of Noah to the hard-nosed, gritty politics of Moses.
So let's set the scene. Moses and his brother Aaron arrive at the court of Pharaoh. They are bringing the protocol. They have zero vested interest. They are bringing the divine laws meant to end the rampant exploitation of their people. They walk into the epicenter of the most powerful, wealthy, and corrupt network on the planet. How does the elite class initially react? I would assume they don't even engage. They just crush them, right?
That's the fascinating part. They do engage, but not on the terms of truth.
Okay.
The source notes a very specific and deeply telling initial reaction from the Egyptian elite. When Moses and Aaron first present themselves and their message, Pharaoh's chiefs don't immediately debate the theology. They don't argue the logic of the divine laws.
What do they do?
Their very first reaction is entirely about class and social status.
How so?
They scoff at Moses because Moses and his people, the Israelites, are a subjugated nation. They are the working class, the enslaved population, the very people upon whose backs the Egyptian empire is built. The elite literally scoff and say, shall we believe in two humans like ourselves whose people are our servants?
It's the ultimate ad hominem attack, but implemented on a societal scale. It's not about the message, it's about who is saying it.
Exactly. The text emphasizes that the elite refuse to listen, primarily because the messengers come from the class they are actively exploiting.
It makes sense. To listen to Moses, to truly engage with his arguments for justice, would require the elite to acknowledge the humanity, the intellect, and the inherent equality of the very people whose stolen labor is building their pyramids and maintaining their luxurious lifestyle.
Yes. Their minds are sealed by their vested economic interest in maintaining a rigid hierarchy of subjugation.
That is profound. They can't hear the truth because the truth is speaking in the voice of the people they are oppressing. It would shatter their istakbar, their arrogant self-identity.
Completely shatter it.
But Moses doesn't back down. He presents the undeniable truth, the clear arguments. And when he does, when the logic of justice is laid out plainly before them, what is the elite's next move? They don't concede.
No, they label the truth as clear magic. Yes, the Arabic term is Sihr. And here is where the source provides a truly brilliant, illuminating definition of magic within this sociological context. We aren't talking about pulling rabbits out of hats or basic sleight of hand.
Yeah.
The text defines magic in this political context as presenting falsehood in the guise of truth to deceive the eyes.
Let's stop you right there, because that definition is everything. Presenting falsehood in the guise of truth to deceive the eyes. That's not a guy in a cape. That is PR. That is propaganda. That is political spin.
It is the core operating system of the corrupt network.
Yeah.
The source points out the deep, cynical irony here. The corrupt network maintains its power by doing exactly this, presenting their brutal exploitation as a divine right, presenting their theft of labor as a public service.
They are the actual magicians.
They are the ultimate magicians, casting illusions over the masses to keep them docile. So when Moses arrives with actual undeniable truth, what do the elite do? They project their own sins onto him.
They accuse Moses of doing exactly what they do every day.
Exactly. They say, this isn't truth. This is just a very sophisticated illusion. You aren't a prophet of justice. You're just a better magician trying to trick us to gain power.
It's classic projection. It's like a corrupt Wall Street executive who has been intentionally cooking the books for a decade, suddenly being confronted by a junior whistleblower who brings in the hard, unassailable data.
Right.
And instead of addressing the data, instead of looking at the math, the executive immediately dismisses the whistleblower by accusing them of trying to manipulate the stock price for personal gain. They attack the messenger's status, and then they accuse the messenger of their own exact crimes, all so they never have to face the audit.
That is a perfect modern parallel. Perfect. And the source takes it a step further by highlighting the political cunning of Pharaoh in this moment. The text references the philosopher Muhammad Iqbal, who called the specific tactic pharaonic political wisdom.
Pharaonic political wisdom. I like that.
Think about the power dynamic. Pharaoh has absolute dictatorial power. He could just order his guards to execute Moses on the spot and be done with it.
Right. He's the king.
But he doesn't. Why? Because Pharaoh is a shrewd politician and he recognizes that Moses has struck a chord. The truth of the message is starting to resonate with the subjugated class.
Okay, so he's scared.
Yes. If Pharaoh just kills Moses outright, he creates a martyr and implicitly admits that he was afraid of the message.
He validates the threat. So what does a shrewd, corrupt politician do instead?
Pharaoh decides to reframe the entire narrative. Instead of engaging in a dangerous debate about the truth of the divine laws or the ethics of slavery, he frames Moses as a national security threat.
Oh, of course.
He tells his people, this man wants to drive you out of your land with his magic. He deliberately changes the terms of the debate from, is our economic system fundamentally unjust, to, this dangerous foreigner wants to steal your property.
Wow. He drags the debate down from the high ground of truth and justice straight into the mud of nationalism, fear-mongering, and xenophobia.
And he doesn't stop there. He counters Moses by calling for his own state-sponsored magicians to have a massive public showdown. He turns a fundamental demand for human rights into a televised sporting event.
Like a spectacle.
He uses religious and political spectacle to distract the populace.
He turns it into a circus. Don't look at the exploitation of the Israelites. Don't look at the fact that you're starving while we build monuments. Look at this shiny, magical battle happening in the town square. Pick a team.
Yeah, exactly.
It is so deeply cynical and yet so incredibly recognizable in modern politics. When a legitimate structural critique is raised by the working class, what does the corrupt establishment do? They distract the public with a manufactured culture war or a political spectacle.
Precisely. It is the use of illusion to maintain the status quo. And this leads us to the final and perhaps most crucial phase of our analysis today.
Okay.
Because the corrupt network uses illusion, projection, and massive public spectacle to maintain its power. How does the protocol of truth actually defeat it? Does the truth win by just having better magic tricks?
That's a great question.
When the state magicians throw down their staffs and they turn into snakes, and Moses throws down his staff and it turns into a bigger snake that eats theirs, is that the victory? Does Moses win by just being the superior magician?
Right, because if the answer is just, my magic is stronger than your magic, then we haven't actually changed the system at all. We've just changed the guy holding the wand. The power structure remains exactly the same. There's just a new boss.
Exactly. And this is where the source material offers a profound, paradigm-shifting conclusion. It reveals a core argument from the text regarding how truth actually operates in the world.
How does it operate?
God does not establish the truth through magic tricks or momentary illusions. The text points out a massive logical flaw in how we traditionally understand miracles. It argues that if temporary physics-breaking miracles were enough to fundamentally change a society, then Pharaoh's entire court would have instantly believed the moment Moses' staff turned into a serpent.
The visual evidence would have been undeniable.
But what actually happened?
They didn't believe. Their minds were already sealed.
They remained entirely stubborn. They just thought, wow, he is a really powerful sorcerer. We need to watch out for him. The spectacle didn't break the psychological firewall.
Wow.
An illusion, or even a genuine momentary disruption of physical laws, might win a debate in the town square. It might draw a massive crowd. But it cannot sustain a civilization. It does not dig out the idols of exploitation, arrogance, and greed from the unconscious mind.
So if it's not a magic staff, how is truth actually established? How do you break the cycle?
The text uses a very specific phrase. Truth is established through divine words, which the author interprets practically as actionable, implementable divine laws.
What does that look like in practice, sociologically?
It means building a functional, tangible society. It means doing the slow, grueling, unglamorous work of gathering a group of people, a community, who actively halts exploitation, who refuse to be subjugated, and who actively stop the criminals from operating.
Yeah.
The text emphasizes that the real lasting defeat of Pharaoh wasn't a magic trick in a courtyard.
What was it?
It was the actual physical exodus of the subjugated people. It was the removal of the exploited labor force, which completely collapsed Pharaoh's economy.
The economy just tanked.
The truth established itself by creating a physical societal reality that Pharaoh's illusions and propaganda could no longer control.
So what stands out to me here, the real aha moment, is that the ultimate proof of the truth isn't breaking the laws of physics. The real miracle is breaking the cycle of human corruption.
Yes.
It's sociological, not magical. A systemic reset requires an actionable protocol. It requires a community that makes a conscious, collective, difficult decision to refuse to be exploited, and equally importantly, refuses to exploit others. They entirely opt out of the parasitic model of the corrupt network.
Yes. The source draws a beautiful, lasting contrast here. It extrapolates that the seed of truth takes time to bear fruit. An illusion, a magic trick, a piece of political propaganda, it provides instant gratification.
A quick fix.
It dazzles the eyes immediately, it provokes a quick emotional reaction, but then it vanishes into thin air, leaving absolutely nothing behind to sustain the people. The corrupt system demands instant results, instant wealth, instant obedience. But the protocol of truth plays the long game.
It builds a foundation.
It plants a seed. It takes time for the roots to grow deep into the soil, for the society to be educated, for the psychological barriers of istakbar and tribalism to be slowly dismantled. But when that seed finally bears fruit, it provides lasting, equitable sustenance for generations.
That is so powerful.
The truth is established not by dazzling the eyes, but by fundamentally restructuring reality to align with justice.
Okay, let's take a breath and logically recap the incredible journey we've been on in this deep dive, because we have covered a massive amount of sociological ground from this ancient text.
We really have.
We started by diagnosing the disease. We looked at how corrupt networks operate this priesthood model that functions like a parasitic vine, draining the tangible wealth of the public while providing nothing but illusions and manufactured authority in return. Right. We saw how the ultimate structural countermeasure to this corruption is the protocol of zero vested interest. The reformer who declares, "I ask you for no reward." This completely short-circuits the system's ability to bribe, negotiate, or assimilate the threat.
From there, we explored the deep psychological traps that protect these corrupt networks, the concept of the sealed mind.
Yeah.
We analyzed how individuals react with ego, emotion, and financial self-interest, literally blocking out undeniable logic to protect their own position within the hierarchy. We saw how this played out in the harsh political arena with Moses and Pharaoh,
where the elite dismissed the truth simply because of the messenger's working-class status, and then used brilliant, cynical political spin to reframe a demand for fundamental justice as a national security threat.
And finally, we arrived at the ultimate realization that a systemic reset, whether it's described as the flood of Noah clearing the ecosystem or the economic collapse of Pharaoh's empire when the labor force leaves, is the logical, inevitable conclusion for a network that violently refuses to adapt to reality.
The truce doesn't win through better magic tricks or louder propaganda. It wins by doing the hard, slow, generational work of building a just society that makes the illusions obsolete.
It's a remarkably cohesive, penetrating theory of sociology wrapped in ancient narrative. And as we wrap up our analysis, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Go for it.
We spent this time talking about ancient Egypt, ancient floods, and ancient priesthoods. But look at the world today. Look at our modern structures of power. How many of our contemporary institutions, whether political, economic, or cultural, dismiss the valid grievances of the working class simply because of their status?
Yeah.
And if those massive institutions are relying on modern illusions, things like PR spin, manufactured outrage, algorithmic distraction, and economic sleight of hand to maintain their power instead of addressing the underlying structural decay, are they unknowingly pulling the trigger on their own systemic reset?
Wow. Are they pulling the trigger on their own flood? You know, we started this deep dive talking about diagnostic muddy waters. The idea that when a society is sick, it's incredibly hard to see the broken bone because the parasite is telling you it's the cure.
Right.
But maybe this ancient text is giving us the X-ray machine. It's showing us exactly what the fracture looks like. It looks like exploitation disguised as salvation.
Absolutely.
And the cure isn't a quick fix. It isn't a magic trick, and it isn't louder propaganda. It's the slow, rigorous, uncompromising application of a protocol built on truth and zero vested interest. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the networks around you, keep looking for the protocol, and we will see you next time.